Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer in Tel Aviv. Officially, the multi-front conflict between Israel and its neighbors is in a state of ceasefire. Gaza, in the first stage of the 20-point peace plan pushed by President Donald Trump, and in Lebanon under the terms of the international ceasefire negotiated a full year ago after Hezbollah was decimated by IDF attacks. In practice, that's not exactly what it feels like. Day after day, the headlines are full of stories of attacks, exchanges of fire, both in Israel's north and south, in Gaza and Lebanon, with little progress towards long-term resolution of the conflicts promised in these agreements. In the case of Gaza, the disarming of Hamas and the creation of alternative rule in the Strip, and in the case of Lebanon, a forceful policy by the Lebanese government reining in Hezbollah's ability to rebuild itself, are far from reality. At the same time, the cozy relationship between President Donald Trump and the Gulf states, built on agreements for significant arms sales, has Israeli leaders concerned about Israel's long-term position in the region. To discuss all of this, and to talk about the massive public demonstrations in Israel calling for the long-delayed investigations of the failures of October 7th that would hold Israeli military and political leaders accountable, is my guest on the podcast today, Haaretz senior security analyst Amos Harel. Our conversation is coming up.
The past 2 years have changed Israel, and the story keeps unraveling. Understand it with Haaretz. Subscribe now for 50% off with the code Haaretz50. That's Haaretz50.
Amos Harel, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming back.
Hi, Allison.
There is so much to discuss, it's almost hard to know where to start. I kind of liked the analogy that you made in one of your recent columns, comparing Israel's challenges on so many different fronts to a web browser with all of its tabs open. So I think I'll start with the Gaza tab, since it's the one that's, I think, causing the most trouble and that most people are the most concerned about. We had a ceasefire declared. The vast majority of the hostages, living and dead, were returned. There are 3 more left. Now we are supposed to be in a place where Hamas is disarming. We're gearing up for some sort of Palestinian technocratic rule in the Gaza Strip, backed up by an international stabilization, if not peacekeeping force. But all we hear in the news headlines is about the division of Gaza into these 2 sections marked by a yellow line, 58% of which is a massive buffer zone completely controlled by the IDF, and the remainder of the territory in Gaza remaining very much under Hamas control. And we have these reports almost on a daily basis of Hamas violations of the ceasefire agreement, followed by harsh retaliations by Israel. There are bombings, continued targeted assassinations. Amos, tell me if my very rough summary is accurate and where, in your view, things stand right now.
I think that's an accurate description of what's going on. The broader perspective would be that we still have a long way to go. If you compare where we are today to mid-October, when the ceasefire was announced, quite a lot has been achieved, as you say. First of all, on and off, we have a ceasefire. No longer do we hear on a daily basis about Israeli casualties, although there are still quite a lot of Palestinian casualties. And as you mentioned, almost all of the hostages are back, which is almost unbelievable. If you look back, most intelligence assessments assumed that Hamas would always keep some live hostages in Gaza. This isn't the way it transpired. All 20 live hostages are back. And in those cases of dead hostages who their bodies are still missing, it's only 3 incidents. And I would assume that this means that Hamas is actually trying. Having said that, everything else is still open to discussion and nothing has been decided. And there's a sort of a paradox or a dissonance here between Trump's ability. We've described the president in the past as a sort of a force of nature. He has the ability to coerce both sides into reaching an agreement. The problem, which is similar to what you see now on Ukraine regarding his new so-called peace plan, is that they have a very hard time, this administration, implementing their ideas. If they have ideas, they have some vague ideas about how to solve things, but nothing ever moves ahead. And this is where we are right now. It's true that Israel has evacuated about half of the territory. It's true that there are less forces deployed. It's true that more humanitarian aid is now entering Gaza, and yet everything else is on the table yet. We don't know where this is going. Will there be an international force? Is somebody actually willing to send soldiers? Will we have international boots on the ground, so to speak? Will any country in the world risk the lives of its soldiers and put them in harm's way, trying to restrain Hamas? These are big challenges out. The Americans are not crazy about that. I don't think Indonesia or Saudi Arabia or the UAE are going to volunteer their troops for that. So there are many, many questions here, and we're just beginning to move on from the war itself, and things are, this is a very difficult ride. It's not going to be easy to solve. And of course, what you have to begin with is Hamas trying to maintain its control on the one hand, and Israel. A lot of the trends among decision makers on the Israeli side, the line of thinking among many of these people is that we need to get back to fighting. Now we have our hostages back, that there is nothing to lose there, and that we could actually continue our fight against Hamas. I'm sure that this is what the Southern Command wants. Probably people around Netanyahu are looking for an excuse for that as well. So nothing has been solved yet. As you mentioned earlier, the open tab description is quite accurate to what's going on in Gaza and also in other places.
What happens in the meantime, though? I mean, nature abhors a vacuum, as we know, and we know that in the Palestinian-controlled area of Gaza, we've got Hamas not only remaining but strengthening. What happens, for lack of a better word, the Israeli-occupied section of Gaza in the meantime, while we're waiting for this international body and or security force to come together?
So there are not many Palestinians who are actually there. I think it's a few thousands. It's mostly people identified with certain clans that are more open to collaboration with Israel, all kinds of militias, local militias, who are, of course, quite in trouble when it comes to dealing with Hamas. The American plan, is actually talking about a new Gaza, building new neighborhoods, new towns, and so on the so-called Israeli side, inside the yellow zone. But that's problematic. It's actually the areas that are closer to the Israeli border. Does Israel want that? I don't think that Israel has much choice. But as you see, there are many conflicting trends here, and it's hard to say where this is actually heading. For the time being, it's assumed to be safer for civilian population to be on the Israeli side, and yet people are not too happy to stay there. And then we'll have to see how this evolves. Will we have international forces? Where will they be stationed? What kind of rules of engagement will be applied when they use force? I don't think they want to use force. These are difficult questions, and I don't think anybody has answers yet. And it's not as if there's much goodwill on any side right now. There's goodwill on the American side, but is Israel happy about the outcome? I'm not so sure. And Hamas, of course, their top priority is to recover, is to rebuild their force. And they're not going to step aside or step down just because the Americans said so. We'll have to see. There will have to be a lot more pressure from the mediators, from Turkey, from Qatar, from Egypt, for this to somehow succeed. Many issues are still in the air. I think it will take us time, but there's a danger there as well, a danger of escalation. Things could go wrong. We've seen in recent days massive Israeli reaction strikes, airstrikes, and so on, because there were some attacks from the Palestinian side. And yet, for the time being, it seems as if Trump's priorities may be in other areas of the world, but he does want this to succeed. So it's not as if Netanyahu can do what he wants. I think we've discussed that in the past, or shortly after the ceasefire was reached, it's Trump's world or Trump's region. He's making the decisions as long as he knows what he's up to. But it's very clear that Bibi, for the time being, does not dare to confront him directly over this.
Almost so much is being made of the visit of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the White House and the love fest that took place between him and President Donald Trump. You wrote ahead of the trip that Israel's most worrying near-term scenario isn't just the prospect of Saudi Arabia getting U.S. F-35 fighter jets, which presumably would eliminate Israel's qualitative edge in the region. You wrote that it's the possibility that this will happen without a deal that includes Israeli-Saudi normalization and some kind of ambiguous Israeli recognition of the vision of a Palestinian state. So isn't that essentially what happened?
Yeah, so it's the rare case where I actually got it right. The main way the Israeli media described this last Sunday was, yes, we're going to have to live with the F-35s to Saudi Arabia, but in return we'll get normalization, and there will be some kind of a vague recognition or some kind of somebody would mention the idea of a two-state solution. It didn't work out that way. Trump made it very clear the minute they met that this was already a done deal, that the F-35s are going to arrive in Riyadh at one time or another. And on the other hand, the Crown Prince was not too happy about the idea of normalization. What the messages we're sending is, first of all, Israel needs to show some goodwill. First of all, Israel needs to move forward with the two-state solution, and then we'll see. So it was not up in the air in any way. This was an American decision, and anybody follow, again, you can never guess where Trump is heading. It depends on the day. It depends on his mood, what he feels about the certain person he's visiting or meeting with at that moment. And yet, it's very clear. It's about business. It's about alliances. And Israel is no longer top priority. I think for about 6, 7, 8 months, let's say between mid-January, when he was sworn in, and early September with that Israeli strike in Qatar trying to kill the Hamas negotiation team, he was on Netanyahu's side. Every time they met, the outcome was that Netanyahu managed to convince Trump to go ahead according to Netanyahu's ideas. This is no longer true. The priorities are very, very clear. And it's business first, and old alliances are not on the top of the agenda. The commitment to Israel perhaps remains, but it doesn't mean that there will be a compromise, that he would not move forward with the F-35 deal just because Israel is concerned. That's no longer the case. I think Netanyahu, as usual, understands these things earlier than we do. But of course, he's not speaking openly about this to the public. He acts according to Trump's will, and then he sends other messages to the public. For instance, the last few days, the talking points from his mouthpieces are that this is not a big deal, that the F-35 is going to be a different F-35 in Saudi Arabia, that it will take a long time, and that Israel would always be safe. That's not exactly true. It's not the end of the world that MBS is getting his fighter planes, but it is a matter of concern from the perception or perspective of the Israeli decision makers, of the Israeli defense analysts, and so on. It's a big deal. I wouldn't simplify the discussion or underestimate the possible consequences in the long run. It's true that Saudi Arabia is not an enemy of Israel, but when you talk of QME, of qualitative military edge, this is something that we were always concerned about, especially fighter planes, and especially regarding Gulf states. The QME is not the principle was not defined regarding Iran or regarding Syria. It was mostly about relatively friendly Arab states, or at least friendly as they were seen by the US. And the competition, the power competition between these states and Israel. So if we go back to that principle, then of course this is something that should worry Israelis.
Amos, let's pop open the Lebanon-Hezbollah tab for a moment. The ceasefire there is a year old after Hezbollah was supposedly decapitated, humiliated, decimated. And yet things seem to be heating up on that border. We hear a lot of predictions of escalation and the conflict growing greater on the northern border. Is this because of the failure of the Lebanese government to step up, do you think? And how ready is the IDF for something immediate to happen on the northern front?
So it was never really a full-scale ceasefire. It was announced, but I'm not sure many people are aware of that. But close to 400 people on the Lebanese side, most of them Hezbollah fighters, some of them Hamas terrorists, have been killed by Israeli strikes since late November last year. So Israel never stopped attacking. It had its own reasons. It was about preventing Hezbollah from returning to the areas south of the Litani River, from rebuilding its forces, and so on. And yet, all through this time, Hezbollah didn't shoot at Israel, I think, even once. It didn't launch one attack. It's not because Hezbollah learned to love Israel. It's because Hezbollah, as you said, it was, I'm not sure decapitated is the right term for the whole organization, but most of its command and control chains, most of its senior leaders, both on the political level and on the military level, were eliminated. So they are quite afraid of Israel at this time. They're trying to improve their military situation in the long run, but they're mostly on the defense. They're mostly suffering from Israeli airstrikes. Now, what happened recently is that until August or September, the general assumption, both in Washington and Jerusalem, was that this was going well, that the new government in Beirut, the new leadership in the Lebanese army, are willing to apply more pressure on Hezbollah in order for it to give up its weapons, and that things are going relatively well. This is apparently no longer true. Things are more difficult right now. Hezbollah is sticking to its guns, and we don't see progress, at least not at the pace that Israel was assuming. Now, this being the new Israel after October 7th, Netanyahu having his own political concerns, Israel is taking a very tough stance against Hezbollah and is actually applying more pressure with some American support. And what you see recently in the news on the Israeli side are headlines assuming that sometime in the near future there will be escalation and perhaps a few days of actual battles between Israel and Hezbollah, maybe massive strikes from our side, and then maybe rockets launched from Lebanon towards Israel for the first time in a year, and so on. It hasn't materialized yet. I'm not so sure it would happen. It's a possibility, and I think some of the reports are actually meant as messages to Hezbollah and to the government in Beirut. I would assume that this is coordinated between Trump and Netanyahu. Even this Sunday, at the government meeting, Netanyahu addressed this issue. So going back to that metaphor about the tabs, the open tabs, this is exactly what's going on. Gaza, a possible escalation, Lebanon as well. And it's all deeply connected to his political calculations, because for Netanyahu, it pays to have these fronts open. It means that there's always an excuse for delays in his trial, for new political initiatives, and so on. If things are back to normal and everything is calm, then people would start asking questions again. What about an independent investigation of the October 7th fiasco? When should elections be held? Shouldn't there be a new discussion about the draft law, which is about to exempt the ultra-Orthodox from military service completely? All of these are huge issues that Netanyahu can hope to avoid if he keeps the fire burning on one front or more.
Well, I want to turn to those fronts for a minute on the demand for the independent government investigation around the failures of October 7th, over the active investigation / consequences that are unfolding in our headlines right now about the IDF now finally taking action against some of the commanders who failed at their jobs on October 7th. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamic there between what's going on in the military and what's going on in the political realm when it comes to this October 7th accountability, which now that we have the hostages back, thank God, and now that we're in the form of a ceasefire, we're having that semi-calm that you say that Netanyahu fears, in which people are talking about accountability, talking about learning the lessons, talking about people paying the price for what happened and what they did and didn't do on October 7th. Can you address that just for a moment?
So this is heavily connected to the politics. The military is not in a zone of its own. It's not dealing with this without concerns of what's going on the outside world. What has been announced, this is the outcome of what was known as the Turjuman Committee, a committee headed by a former General Sami Turjuman. He was appointed by Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir in March to revalue or readdress the different army investigations over October 7th and what led to October 7th. And they handed in their report to Eyal Zamir about 2 weeks ago. And there were a lot of remarks about how badly the IDF performed, of course, before October 7th and on the night of October 6th and the morning of the 7th. But there were no direct conclusions about what should be done, whether different officers should be disciplined and so on. And now, apparently, this Sunday, Zamir is actually meeting with generals. Many of them have resigned already. And he's telling them what he decided to do about them. I don't think that anybody would be sent to jail. This is not a criminal proceeding. But it is extremely important if the military announces that certain generals or colonels or intelligence officers are to be blamed or have responsibility for the failures and the mistakes. This is hugely important. As usual, the Netanyahu role is extremely important as well. What kind of game is he playing there? Will Netanyahu use that? Netanyahu is, of course, fighting a battle against an independent investigation. Now, a lot of people would say if Zamir uses disciplinary action against some generals, then this would be an example for what needs to be done regarding the politicians, that there should be a clear and wide investigation about everything that happened, and then we should get the judges or the members of this committee would tell us what actually happened. Of course, Netanyahu does not think that way. Netanyahu wants to divert attention to the generals. He wants generals being disciplined because it will show that the army is actually to blame for what has happened, and he has no intention of having an independent investigation of what happened on the political level or the national level. We'll see how this plays out. I think, as usual, these debates in the Israeli public, anybody who still trusts Netanyahu and supports him would say enough is enough. This is, finally the generals have been dealt with. Let's move on. While others, including most, I think, of the families who lost their loved ones on October 7th, what's known as the October 7th Council, are not going to be satisfied with that. They're going to demand that the political arena is investigated as well. We'll see how this plays out, whether it's a very important, whether it turns out to be an important political question. There were demonstrations on Saturday night in Tel Aviv, mostly now focused on the demand for investigation, no longer dealing with the fate of the hostages. The opposition naturally emphasizes this issue. I think it's a real importance to most of the Israeli public. We know that the polls are showing that 70% of the public supports an independent investigation. But this is not the way Netanyahu sees it. For him, it's crucial to avoid any kind of investigation or any kind of punishment regarding October 7th. And of course, he never took responsibility to anything. He kept saying, if you recall, Alison, in the beginning, that once this is over, everybody would have to give answers and so on. Well, it's not exactly over, and he wants this to be this way on the one hand, and he has no intention to admit any kind of responsibility because this is who he is. This is a page from Trump's notebook, but I think maybe Netanyahu invented that even before Trump came up with these ideas.
Amos, finally, sometimes I think that might be your journalistic duty to keep us all stressed out. You did that with a recent column headlined, "As it prepares for multi-front wars of attrition, the IDF faces a manpower crunch and spiraling cost," in which you said that the unstable region, which we've talked about now extensively on this podcast, demands what you called a rapid recovery by the IDF, a process that hasn't truly begun. And ironically, right, is that when it comes to manpower, our government seems very concerned with helping young men, ultra-Orthodox men, not serve and help solve the manpower crisis rather than figuring out to deal with what they need to do in order to make sure we're ready for a possible other surprise from one of the fronts, and that, as the cliche goes, October 7th never happens again. How worried should we be about the IDF today? And will the fact that it's an election year be good or bad for the mission of getting the IDF back on its feet?
So it's a combination of quite a few things. Again, if you look at the consequences of the war on most fronts, even considering the horrific fiasco of October 7th, Israel has improved. Lebanon, Iran, Syria, to some extent Gaza, we saw improvement on the IDF side, and we saw better results as the war continued. Not a decisive victory on most fronts, unfortunately, but we did see improvement. And yet, after 2 years of a sort of a very long, undecided war, people are tired. A lot of people who are career officers are saying enough is enough. We want to have other careers. We want to get back to our families and so on. And you can see that everywhere. You can see that with young soldiers suffering from PTSD. You can see that with career officers considering alternative careers, and you can see that with miluimniks, with reservists who served 100 and sometimes 200 or 250 days a year in the last 2 years because of the war. So these are ongoing problems. Then you have financial issues. What kind of budget does the IDF need? And what about other concerns the government has, whether it's education, health, and so on? Everything was hurt by the war, and every part of Israeli society needs more money in order to recover. And then there's the collective trauma, if you'd like, that comes from October 7th. The fact that that there was no investigation, the fact that there's nobody taking responsibility on the political side, the fact that we feel still stuck and perhaps threatened by events after October 7th. All of this does not bode well for the army right now. It's not the end of the world, and we've seen the army recover and improve during these 2 years. But yes, if you ask me, am I concerned? Yes, I think part of the issues here, we have to understand that we live in a very hostile region, and that things are not going to suddenly improve in a miraculous way just because we want them to. We want to feel safe, and we want things to feel better. It's not about feeling better. It's about correcting what is wrong. And I don't think the public or the country has moved to that stage yet. All of those political discussions, the political turmoil, the scars in Israeli society are, for the time being, a little bit too wide and too deep for us to recover. This is what I'm concerned about.
Amos Harel, thanks as always for coming on the podcast. Please keep up the great coverage and analysis, no matter how much it stresses us out. Thanks again.
Thanks, Alison.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Amos Harel, and to producer and editor, Nahara Malkin. If you'd like to continue to listen to the podcast and make sure you don't miss an episode, please subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a 5-star rating, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.